The air in the cafe was thick with the smell of roasted beans and the quiet hum of afternoon conversations. It was the kind of place where people tapped on laptops and lovers held hands over half-eaten croissants. For me, it was a sanctuary. A warm, safe bubble where my son, Noah, and I could escape the silence of our small apartment on a drizzly Tuesday. Noah was 6. He had his mother's eyes, a startling shade of blue that could make you forget all the bad in the world. He also had her quiet. Since we lost her 2 years ago, he'd become a whisper of the boy he used to be. He didn't speak much anymore, not since the accident. The doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response. I called it my daily heartbreak. He was building a magnificent castle out of sugar packets, his small brow furrowed in concentration. I was nursing a black coffee, watching him, trying to pour all the love I had into that little boy so he might one day feel whole again. That's when the peace shattered. The cafe door slammed open, letting in a gust of cold wind and a man radiating a different kind of chill. He was tall, built like he spent his life in a gym but with the soft, entitled look of someone who'd never had a single real fight in his life. He was on his phone, his voice a loud, aggressive bark that cut through the gentle ambience. "I don't care what the contract says, you imbecile. I want it done yesterday. Do you have any idea who I am?" He was the kind of guy who expected the world to part for him. And it usually did. He strutted to the counter, still yelling, and placed his order without acknowledging the barista, a young woman named Clara who was trying her best to be polite. When his complicated, sugar-free, non-fat, extra hot, oat milk latte with a sprinkle of cinnamon wasn't ready in 30 seconds, he slammed his fist on the counter. "What is this, a soup kitchen? Move it." Noah flinched. His little hands stopped stacking the sugar packets. He looked up at me, his blue eyes wide with a fear that made my chest tighten. I gave him a small, reassuring smile and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's okay, buddy. Some people just forgot their manners today." The man got his coffee and turned, scanning the room for a seat. His eyes landed on the small table next to ours, the only one left. "Perfect." He swaggered over, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on the worn wooden floor. As he squeezed past our table, his coat brushed against Noah's elbow, sending the entire sugar packet castle tumbling into a chaotic heap. Noah's face crumpled. He stared at the fallen masterpiece, his lower lip trembling. He didn't cry, which was somehow worse. He just looked at me with that silent devastation. I took a slow breath. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm and even. "You knocked over my son's castle." The man didn't even turn around. He just sat down, pulling out his laptop. "Kids shouldn't be making a mess in public," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A hot coal of anger burned in my stomach, but I kept my face neutral. For Noah. I always kept it neutral for Noah. "I'm not asking for an apology for myself," I said, my tone still level. "But you could look at him and say you're sorry. It would mean a lot." That got his attention. He slowly turned his head, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. He looked me up and down. I was in a worn flannel shirt, jeans with a small tear at the knee, and work boots. My hands were calloused from my job as a carpenter. To him, I was invisible. Just another working stiff. He leaned towards our table. "Or what?" he sneered. "You gonna make me?" I stood up slowly. I didn't want a scene. I never wanted a scene. But I wouldn't let him intimidate my son. "I'm just asking for a little common decency," I said quietly. He stood up too, using his height to try and tower over me. He was a couple of inches taller. "Listen, pal, why don't you take your brat and his little sugar mess and get out of here before I make you?" My jaw tightened. "The only person leaving is you. Finish your coffee and go." That was the wrong thing to say. His ego, already bloated, couldn't handle the defiance. He glanced around, making sure he had an audience, this entitled peacock needing his validation. Then, with a swift, casual cruelty, he backhanded me across the face. It wasn't a punch. It was a slap. A demeaning, humiliating slap meant to put me in my place. The sound cracked through the cafe like a gunshot. A woman gasped. Clara, the barista, dropped a mug. My head snapped to the side, and I felt the sting bloom on my cheek. My first thought wasn't of the pain. It was of Noah. I turned my head, my eyes immediately finding his. His face was pale, his small body rigid with terror. He was staring at the man, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in 2 years, not just fear, but a flicker of anger. A protective fury for his dad. He was on the verge of something, and I knew I had to control this situation immediately. The man was puffing his chest out, waiting for me to cower, to crumble. He was waiting for the victim he expected me to be. I straightened up. I didn't rub my cheek. I didn't shout. I just looked at him. And in that moment, the mask of the weary, gentle single dad I wore for Noah every single day simply slid away. The man who looked back at the bully was someone else entirely. My eyes, which Noah saw as full of love and patience, became flat. Cold. Assessing. It was the gaze of a predator, not prey. I took one step closer to him. Just one. It wasn't aggressive, but it was deliberate. My voice, when I spoke, was no longer calm. It was a low, quiet rumble that held the promise of absolute violence. It was a voice that had been used to give orders in environments where a wrong word meant death. That was a mistake, I said. He saw it. The change in my eyes. The change in my posture. The air around me seemed to shift. He was a bully, a shark in the small pond of a corporate office, but he had just bumped into something far, far bigger in the deep ocean. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. His bravado was cracking. Yeah, he stammered, trying to reclaim his ground. And what are you gonna do about it, carpenter boy? He didn't see the man approaching from behind him. None of them did. It was a guy in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and a build like a refrigerator. He'd been sitting in the corner, reading a newspaper. He folded it slowly and stood up. He walked over and stood right behind the bully. "Hey, Derek," the gray-haired man said, his voice as calm and dangerous as mine. The bully, Derek, spun around. The look of confusion on his face was quickly replaced by one of recognition, and then, sheer, unadulterated terror. "Colonel Steele?" Derek whispered, his face draining of all color. I didn't see you there, sir." Colonel Steele ignored him completely. He looked at me, his old, tired eyes holding a deep respect. "Major," he said, with a small, respectful nod. "It's good to see you. Although, I see some things never change. Still cleaning up other people's messes." The word "major" hung in the air like a thunderclap. The entire cafe was silent. You could hear the coffee machine hissing in the background. Derek looked from the colonel to me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Major," he croaked. I kept my eyes on Derek, that flat, dangerous look still in them. "It's been a while, Colonel," I said, my voice returning to its normal, quiet tone. "I'm not in the service anymore." "Once a Delta Force operator, always a Delta Force operator," the colonel said, his eyes now fixed on Derek with utter contempt. "You never lose it. It's in the bones." He took a step closer to Derek. "This man, you pathetic piece of work, has done more for this country by breakfast than you will in your entire miserable life. He's been on missions you can't even imagine, in places you've never heard of. He's stared down enemies that would make you wet yourself. And you slapped him in a coffee shop because your latte was late and a child's game disturbed your Royal Highness? Derek looked like he was about to be sick. He turned back to me, his eyes wide with panic. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. I leaned in, my voice a whisper only he could hear. It shouldn't matter who I am, or what I used to do. It should matter that I'm a father, and you terrified my son. Apologize to him. He immediately turned to Noah, who was watching the whole scene with wide, unblinking eyes. I'm so sorry, kid. I'm so sorry. I'm a jerk. It was a stupid accident. Noah just stared at him. Then, slowly, his gaze moved from the trembling bully to me. And in that look, I saw it. Not just fear or confusion. I saw awe. He had just seen a side of his father he never knew existed. He saw the man who had protected his country, capable of a terrifying stillness, but who had chosen to use his words, to demand an apology for him. He saw strength, not in the slap that could have been, but in the restraint that was shown. Derek, dismissed by everyone, grabbed his coat and laptop and fled, his expensive shoes squeaking a frantic retreat out the door. The silence he left behind was profound. Then, Clara started clapping. A few others joined in. It wasn't for me. It was for the quiet dignity of a father protecting his son. Colonel Steele walked over, put a firm hand on my shoulder, and squeezed. You did good, son. You always did. He glanced at Noah, gave him a gentle wink, and then walked out himself, leaving me alone in the new, respectful quiet of the cafe. I sat back down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached out and gently touched the red mark on my cheek. Noah was staring at me. I expected him to be more frightened, more withdrawn. Instead, he reached out a tentative hand and placed it on my arm. Then, he spoke. Daddy, he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. You didn't hit him. Tears welled in my eyes. I shook my head. No, buddy. I didn't. Why? He asked, his little brow furrowed. He was mean. I pulled him onto my lap and held him tight. Because, Noah, being strong isn't about hitting back. It's about being able to, but choosing not to. It's about protecting the people you love, not with your fists, but with your heart. That man was weak. He needed to prove he was strong by being mean. But real strength? Real strength is quiet. It's patient. It's for the people who need you to be strong for them. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, he looked at the fallen sugar packets. Can we build a new castle? A bigger one? A smile broke through my tears. Yeah, buddy. We can build the biggest castle in the world. And there, in that warm little cafe, surrounded by the scent of coffee and the lingering echoes of a confrontation, we did. We built a castle, packet by packet. And every time Noah placed one, he would look at me and smile, a real smile, full of light. He had found his voice again. And in finding it, he had given me back a piece of my own heart. Looking back, that day wasn't about me being dealt a force. It was about me being a dad. It was a lesson not just for my son, but for me. We spend so much of our lives trying to be tough for the world, but the only armor that ever truly matters is the one we build around the hearts of the people we love. I remember my own father telling me something similar when I was a kid. I got into a fight at school with a boy who was picking on my little sister. I came home with a bloody nose and a black eye, but I was proud. My dad sat me down, cleaned me up, and said, "You protected your sister. That's good. But remember, the loudest man in the room is usually the most scared. Don't ever fight because you're angry. Only fight if you have to protect someone who can't protect themselves." That day in the cafe, with Noah watching, I finally understood what he meant. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength in your own life or the father who taught you what it means to be truly strong, please hit that like button. It lets me know that these stories matter to you. And if you want to see more stories about everyday heroes, about the battles we fight not with weapons but with love and patience, then subscribe to the channel. Become part of this family. Because the greatest mission we will ever undertake isn't in some far-off land. It's right here, at home, building castles out of sugar packets and teaching the next generation what real strength looks like. Thank you for listening.